May 1944, within the stone fortress of Colditz Castle, icy wind swept across the prison courtyard as British naval officer Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor adjusted his broken spectacles. Beyond the grey towers, war thundered across Europe, yet inside these walls, silence ruled, broken only by footsteps of guards and distant echoes of defiance. Pryor, once a signals expert aboard HMS Frobisher, had been captured during a failed channel operation, and now found himself trapped behind enemy lines, armed only with a pencil, paper, and his intellect. Every letter he wrote home passed through German censors who believed him defeated, but Pryor's mind remained dangerously alive. Colditz housed officers considered escape risks, men who plotted freedom through tunnels, disguises, and trickery, yet Pryor's plan was quieter and infinitely more daring. He would escape not through walls, but through words, using language as a weapon the enemy could not see. In his cell, under dim lamplight, he studied the censors' habits, counting pauses and handwriting strokes, learning their rhythm like Morse. Every comma became a code, every phrase a bridge connecting him to London. One morning, a Red Cross parcel arrived containing stationery and tea, small luxuries smuggled into this world of concrete and control. Pryor unfolded a sheet, his heart steady as he began his message. The garden here has taken well this season, though the soil is difficult. To an untrained eye, it spoke of boredom and horticulture. To MI9 in London, it would mean German troop concentrations near Pas de Calais remained unchanged. Each letter traveled slowly through layers of censorship, carried by neutral couriers across Switzerland, eventually landing upon a decoding desk beneath Whitehall's flickering lamps. Pryor's method drew upon his naval experience, where radio silence often demanded communication through implication and tone. Here, among prisoners and watchtowers, he found freedom through syntax. His coded language disguised intelligence as banality, sentences hiding secrets capable of altering invasion plans. Others dismissed him as eccentric, calling his methods mad, yet he persisted, convinced words could turn tides. Kindly like, share, and subscribe to uncover more untold stories of hidden heroes who rewrote history with nothing but courage. Each passing week tightened the war's clock. Allied invasion plans gathered momentum, yet doubts haunted London. Where would Hitler strike his counterblow? In Colditz, Pryor wrote again, masking reconnaissance within musings about weather and spring. Every stroke of ink was rebellion, every envelope a lifeline across occupied Europe. History would not remember the sound of his pen scratching paper that night. But within those silent pages lay the intelligence that would one day decide whether D-Day would triumph or die upon the sand. Autumn 1939, the chill of a new war hung over Portsmouth's naval dockyards as young John Pryor, recently commissioned sub-lieutenant, reported for duty aboard HMS Frobisher. Trained in communications and cryptographic procedure, he possessed an unusually analytical mind, fascinated by sound patterns and cipher theory. Britain's Royal Navy valued precision above intuition, yet Pryor's instincts leaned toward unconventional solutions. In the mess hall, he often remarked that the art of secrecy lies not in silence, but in misdirection, a phrase that would later define his survival. When war spread across Europe, he was assigned to North Sea convoy operations, where steel, salt, and sudden death shaped every decision. In February 1941, while escorting merchant ships, Frobisher sustained severe damage under Luftwaffe attack near the Dutch coast. Amid chaos, Pryor's section worked frantically to restore communications, transmitting distress signals through shattered equipment until capture became inevitable. Pulled from wreckage by German sailors, he was interrogated for weeks before being classified a technical officer of interest, then sent inland toward Colditz Castle. His captors assumed him harmless, a disciplined seaman stripped of tools, but Pryor's greatest instrument was imagination. Isolation sharpened it, turning his cell into a laboratory for mental warfare. Within those grey walls, the seeds of rebellion took form. Other prisoners plotted tunnels and disguises, yet Pryor studied language. He watched guards exchange reports, noting bureaucratic phrasing that revealed hierarchy and thought. He practiced writing in layered meaning, embedding dual significance within ordinary conversation. At first it was mental exercise, a way to preserve clarity under confinement, but soon it became purpose. When he learned that the British intelligence service MI9 supported coded correspondence from POWs, he recognized his chance to serve again without weapon or uniform. Pryor developed his personal code rooted in pre-war naval terminology. References to gardens, weather, and tools. Each carried distinct tactical meanings, concealed beneath letters approved by German overseers. He wrote slowly, deliberately, his tone measured, never emotional, avoiding suspicion. His early attempts failed, responses delayed, messages misunderstood. But persistence refined precision. Behind every carefully written sentence lay discipline forged through military training and intellectual daring. Through months of experimentation, the officer once bound by naval command transformed into a silent operative behind enemy lines. He mastered the art of concealment, not in shadows, but within ink and grammar. What began as survival evolved into strategy. From the confines of captivity emerged a new kind of spy, one who needed no pistol, only paper, and whose quiet defiance would soon echo across the Atlantic, altering the destiny of invasion itself. Winter 1942. Within the austere corridors of Whitehall, the British War Office established an organization so secret that even members of Parliament knew little of its existence. This was MI9, the intelligence branch tasked with aiding prisoners of war, smuggling escape tools into camps and, most audaciously, transforming captured servicemen into sources of vital intelligence. While other divisions focused on sabotage and espionage abroad, MI9 sought victory through the minds of the imprisoned, turning hopeless confinement into opportunity. From its unmarked offices near St. James's Park, cryptographers, linguists, and psychologists developed codes subtle enough to pass German censorship undetected, yet precise enough to deliver battlefield information across occupied Europe. Led by the brilliant yet eccentric Brigadier Norman Crockett, MI9 operated through invisible channels disguised as charitable correspondence. Red Cross parcels carried hidden compasses, maps printed on silk, and razors concealing microfilm. But more revolutionary than these gadgets was the idea that letters, ordinary, sentimental, seemingly harmless, could serve as intelligence networks. By late 1943, thousands of Allied prisoners across Europe were instructed, through coded training manuals sent home, to include specific phrases, references, or punctuation sequences within their family mail. Each letter approved by the Germans became a whisper through the fog of war, relaying weather reports, troop movements, and morale. At MI9's decoding center, teams of analysts worked around the clock beneath blackout curtains, reading every word as if each comma were a cipher key. Certain phrases like, "The garden grows well," or "The weather has turned," could indicate the presence or withdrawal of German divisions. Others carried warnings about guard changes, air defenses, or rumored movements near coastal installations. These letters were not intercepted by spies or couriers. They were approved, stamped, and delivered by the enemy himself. The audacity was breathtaking, the execution meticulous, and the consequences deadly if discovered. By 1944, MI9's methods had matured into a structured doctrine known internally as Directive Epsilon. It encouraged imprisoned officers to communicate coded intelligence through established linguistic frameworks rather than improvised messages, minimizing risk while maximizing clarity. Among those who received instructions via indirect training channels was Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor, whose sharp linguistic memory and naval communication background made him an ideal participant. While most prisoners used codes to discuss conditions or morale, Pryor recognized their strategic potential. Within weeks, he began embedding reconnaissance details within mundane discussions about food, hobbies, and seasons. MI9 soon realized that this single prisoner's letters carried extraordinary accuracy, signaling a breakthrough in their clandestine campaign. Through his pen, The invisible war of words began shifting the balance of the coming invasion. Spring 1944, the air inside Colditz Castle was thick with damp stone and whispered defiance, where prisoners sought fragments of freedom through invention and hope. Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor, seated at a narrow wooden desk, bent over a single sheet of paper that could either save his comrades or condemn him to execution. The Germans permitted weekly correspondence, tightly censored, believing it a harmless concession to morale. Yet for Pryor, each letter was a battlefield, his sentences the soldiers, his punctuation the artillery. He wrote not to comfort family, but to communicate with London, concealing war's most dangerous truths within phrases that appeared disarmingly ordinary. Pryor's early messages described weather and gardens, subjects innocuous enough to escape suspicion yet vital within his code. "The roses have not bloomed as expected," one line read, signaling that enemy coastal defenses remained unmoved since reconnaissance last confirmed their position. Another note about watering the soil carefully indicated troop replenishments arriving near Boulogne. Every carefully chosen word carried risk. A single misstep could expose his network and end dozens of lives. The Germans rid his correspondence repeatedly, sometimes dissecting sentences for hidden meaning, yet none could decipher his linguistic camouflage. His mastery lay in balance. Writing too plainly raised doubt, too cleverly invited death. Within the prisoners' quarters, others smuggled contraband or plotted tunnels, but Pryor remained still, preferring the invisible rebellion of ink. His bunkmates teased him as the mad writer, unaware his scribbled observations could influence invasion planning on the other side of Europe. Each evening he revised drafts until censors' routines felt predictable, their habits mapped as precisely as battlefield formations. When guards collected the outgoing mail, he smiled faintly, knowing those folded pages traveled through Switzerland toward MI9's decoding room beneath Whitehall's grey skyline. There, analysts would interpret his garden metaphors into operational data, confirming intelligence gathered by aircraft and agents alike. Outside the castle, Germany's empire trembled under Allied bombardment, yet confidence in Pas de Calais' fortifications remained firm. Precisely the illusion Pryor's letters helped maintain. His quiet defiance, concealed beneath polite language, became a weapon as effective as any rifle. Within captivity, he wielded control that generals could only envy, the power to shape perception. History's greatest invasion waited upon signals written in phrases about soil, sunlight, and rain. No one in Colditz could imagine that these delicate sentences, carried across nations by enemy approval, would one day decide whether thousands of men would live or die upon Normandy's shores. Late May 1944, storm clouds gathered above Saxony as Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor composed a letter that would alter the fate of the war. Outside his barred window, rain traced slow rivers down the glass, echoing his thoughts as he arranged phrases with surgical precision. This message, more daring than any before, carried intelligence confirming that Hitler's armored divisions remained concentrated at Pas de Calais, exactly where the Allies hoped he would keep them. The line between genius and madness blurred as Pryor drafted his report using the only tool available to him: metaphor. "I have decided to dig the garden again," he wrote, an apparently trivial remark that in MI9's codebook meant enemy reinforcements remain entrenched. Beneath those words lay truth capable of saving tens of thousands of soldiers preparing to storm Normandy's beaches. When the letter left Colditz, it passed through multiple layers of inspection, each step another risk of exposure. German censors examined every page beneath ultraviolet lamps, searching for invisible ink or irregular indentation, yet found nothing suspicious. They saw only the mild complaints of a prisoner longing for fresh air and simpler days. Unaware of its hidden meaning, they stamped the envelope and sent it along its neutral courier route through Geneva, wrapped among hundreds of ordinary POW messages bound for England. Each mile brought the coded garden closer to London's grey horizon, where war rooms buzzed with invasion plans and nerves tightened by uncertainty. In Whitehall's secure decoding chamber, MI9 analysts recognized Pryor's handwriting instantly. They unfolded the letter under filtered light, tracing his wording with trained eyes, matching each phrase to their cipher index. Soil difficult to manage, confirmed heavy German troop presence. Weather improving, implied reduced patrol activity along the French coast. The final phrase, seeds taking root, confirmed construction of new coastal artillery positions, data aligning perfectly with aerial reconnaissance. To military strategists desperate for clarity, Pryor's letter was more than communication. It was confirmation that Hitler's generals still expected the invasion at Calais. The message reached Allied command just days before D-Day, reinforcing confidence in Operation Fortitude, the deception plan designed to mislead the enemy. Inside his cell, unaware of the letter's impact, Pryor folded his hands and whispered a quiet prayer that someone had understood. The mad gardener's coded note, disguised as a prisoner's monotony, became one of World War II's most consequential transmissions. His simple words had preserved the illusion, delayed German reinforcements, and ensured that the greatest amphibious assault in history would meet defenders unprepared and misled by the brilliance of one captive pen. June 2, 1944, deep within the subterranean corridors of London's Whitehall, a faint hum of typewriters merged with the rhythmic ticking of clocks. Behind a heavy steel door marked Room 47, MI9's decoding division worked beneath flickering lamps, surrounded by piles of incoming correspondence from prisoner camps scattered across Nazi-occupied Europe. Among hundreds of envelopes lay one marked with faint pencil handwriting, John Pryor's letter from Colditz. It appeared unremarkable, yet within its polite paragraphs about weather and gardening rested information that could determine the success of Operation Overlord. The analysts moved carefully, aware that a misplaced interpretation could distort truth and mislead command. Here, language itself became battlefield terrain. At the decoding table sat Lieutenant Margaret Havers, one of MI9's most skilled linguists, her mind trained to recognize concealed syntax patterns, invisible to the uninitiated. She unfolded Pryor's letter with gloved precision, eyes narrowing as she read, "I have begun digging again, though the soil proves stubborn after so much rain." To the untrained reader, it conveyed boredom. To Havers, it screamed urgency. Her pencil danced across margins, decoding keywords through the epsilon phrase index. Within minutes, the hidden meaning emerged, confirmation that German panzer divisions remained entrenched north of the Seine, unprepared for immediate redeployment. Word spread swiftly through the intelligence hierarchy. Messages were dispatched to the Joint Intelligence Committee, and soon the contents of one prisoner's letter reached Eisenhower's planning staff. Analysts cross-referenced Pryor's coded assessment with aerial reconnaissance and intercepted Enigma traffic, each layer of verification tightening confidence in the deception plan. His report proved that Hitler's command still expected an invasion at Calais, unaware that the true strike would fall upon Normandy. It was a revelation of monumental consequence, a whisper from captivity, validating months of Allied disinformation. Inside Room 47, the atmosphere changed from tension to awe. Pryor's consistency, precision, and subtle genius astonished even the veterans of MI9's coding department. Crockett himself reviewed the letter, remarking quietly that some prisoners fight wars louder than armies. The decoded sheet was stamped Action Priority Alpha and transferred to the War Cabinet's nightly briefing, its importance underscored by the invasion countdown. None outside the room would ever know that a man behind barbed wire, armed with only paper and courage, had just confirmed one of history's greatest strategic illusions. That night, under blackout skies, the lights of Room 47 burned late into dawn, their glow reflecting from brass fixtures like stars. Somewhere across enemy lines, Pryor slept unaware that his whispered code, disguised as madness, had become the voice that guided an army toward destiny. June 3, 1944, as rain swept across the Channel, the most elaborate deception operation in military history reached its critical phase. Known as Operation Fortitude, it was the invisible shield protecting the real invasion. Crafted through radio trickery, double agents, phantom divisions, and one prisoner's coded words. In London, Pryor's decoded letter arrived at precisely the right moment, confirming that Hitler's high command remained convinced the Allied assault would strike the Pas de Calais. This false belief was no accident. It was the masterpiece of intelligence warfare, and MI9's coded network formed its heartbeat. Through letters, broadcasts, and fabrications, the Allies fed the lie until it hardened into German certainty. In Kent's countryside, wooden tanks and inflatable trucks lined open fields, photographed deliberately by Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes. Radio operators transmitted fictional chatter describing non-existent regiments, led by the charismatic yet entirely misplaced General George S. Patton. Intercepted communications confirmed that German analysts traced these signals, reinforcing the illusion that a colossal invasion force gathered opposite Calais. Yet without Pryor's confirmation from captivity, British command dared not trust the deception's depth. His letter proved the delusion had taken root, giving Allied planners the confidence to proceed. Thus, one man's ink strengthened the greatest military masquerade ever staged. Inside the shadowed offices of the 20 Committee, which managed Britain's double agents, satisfaction mingled with fear. Every false report required precision, for one inconsistency could unravel years of planning. Across occupied France, the Abwehr, Germany's intelligence agency, compiled elaborate charts marking troop locations based entirely upon Allied deception. Hitler, distrustful yet indecisive, demanded his generals retain the 15th Army at Calais, waiting for a second invasion that would never come. Pryor's coded message, filtered through MI9's channels, provided the final assurance that their ruse had succeeded beyond expectation. While warships assembled silently along Britain's southern ports, Fortitude's architects worked through sleepless nights maintaining illusion. Coded telegrams updated false weather forecasts, decoy supply manifests, and fabricated casualty reports. Each deception layer concealed the true concentration near Portsmouth, where men and machines prepared to cross toward Normandy. Beneath this grand orchestration lay the moral paradox of war. Truth preserved through lies, victory achieved through illusion. John Pryor, isolated in Colditz, unknowingly became Fortitude's most effective participant, his modest sentences amplifying deception that would save countless lives. As the invasion's eve approached, his invisible signature echoed across Europe, binding together radiostatic, false armies, and imagination into one final act of strategic genius destined to deceive an empire. Dawn, June 6, 1944. The English Channel roared beneath steel-grey clouds as Allied convoys carved paths through violent seas toward the coast of France. The thunder of artillery mixed with the endless hum of engines, forming a chorus announcing the greatest amphibious invasion in human history. On the horizon, faint silhouettes of landing craft surged forward, carrying soldiers who would decide Europe's fate before nightfall. Across the continent, far behind barbed wire and stone, Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor awoke to distant silence, unaware that his coded letters had just altered the tide of war. The storm he had helped shape now broke over Normandy's shores, where courage met chaos beneath relentless fire. As Allied troops stormed Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, the deception built through Operation Fortitude held firm. In Berlin, Hitler's generals refused to redeploy the armored 15th Army, certain that the Normandy landings were only a diversion. Even as reports of massive engagements flooded German headquarters, orders demanded patience until the real invasion arrived at Calais. That hesitation, born from Pryor's coded confirmation weeks earlier, granted the Allies precious time to establish their beachhead, move supplies ashore, and unite scattered divisions. Every minute delayed saved hundreds of lives. Every hour consolidated victory from uncertainty. In London's underground war rooms, Churchill listened to early dispatches under dim light, cigar smoke curling upward as generals read casualty reports and progress updates. MI9 officers, confined to their coded domains, knew that somewhere in a distant cell, a man with no weapon had silently shaped the day's outcome. They could not reveal his identity, nor share his contribution. Yet within classified memoranda, the phrase Colditz source, Calais confirmation appeared repeatedly. The whisper of one prisoner had echoed across oceans, embedding itself within the command structure of history's most decisive operation. By afternoon, Normandy's beaches were secured through exhaustion, valor, and deception intertwined. Smoke veiled the horizon as naval guns pounded distant targets, while Allied medics tended the wounded amid shattered dunes. Across the Channel, the bells of London rang faintly through drizzle, marking the beginning of Europe's liberation. Inside Colditz, Pryor continued his quiet routine, writing, observing, waiting, unaware that his garden metaphors had already bloomed into victory. The invasion succeeded not solely through might, but through minds that refused surrender. In that moment, every hidden letter, every coded word, and every act of unseen defiance became part of the storm that reclaimed a continent from tyranny. April 1945, spring sunlight filtered through the broken towers of Colditz Castle as Allied troops advanced across Germany's collapsing front. The thunder of artillery had replaced the familiar silence of captivity, and prisoners, long resigned to endless waiting, now stood at the threshold of liberation. Among them, Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor watched in disbelief as American soldiers entered the courtyard, their uniforms dusty, their expressions weary yet triumphant. The war he had fought with paper and pen was finally over, though few would ever understand his role within it. While others rushed toward freedom shouting with joy, Pryor simply folded his final unfinished letter, knowing the weapon he had wielded no longer needed to strike. In the days following liberation, intelligence officers interviewed former POWs, seeking evidence of collaboration or espionage. Pryor's explanations about coded correspondence were met with polite skepticism and quiet dismissal. Without official clearance, MI9 could not acknowledge his participation in the secret program that had sustained Operation Fortitude. His reports remained locked within classified files, stamped for official use only, inaccessible to the very man whose words had carried them. Among fellow prisoners, his reputation as the mad letter writer lingered, a myth they carried home as curiosity rather than truth. History's machinery turned forward, leaving behind those whose contributions could never be spoken aloud. Returning to England, Pryor resumed civilian life in quiet obscurity. The naval uniform was replaced by a professor's jacket. The barracks by lecture halls filled with students unaware of their teachers' wartime past. He spoke seldom of Colditz, only remarking occasionally about the value of communication under constraint, a phrase his colleagues mistook for academic metaphor. Yet at night, in moments of solitude, he revisited the coded words that once bridged two worlds, the prisoner and the free, the hopeless and the defiant. The victory of D-Day had been won, but its architects of silence remained forgotten, buried beneath layers of secrecy too deep for recognition. Years later, when MI9's wartime archives began to surface, historians stumbled upon correspondence bearing his signature, confirming that the so-called mad prisoner had been one of the most effective intelligence assets of the war. The revelation came too late for medals or remembrance ceremonies, yet his quiet defiance endured beyond obscurity. Pryor's letters had not merely passed censorship, they had pierced tyranny itself, proving that truth, when spoken carefully enough, could survive captivity, skepticism, and even time itself. Autumn 1961, in a modest Oxford study lined with maritime charts and weathered books, John Pryor sat beneath fading afternoon light, his hands trembling slightly as he reread an old letter now yellowed with age. It was one of his own, the same harmless message once sent from behind enemy lines, now returned to him through declassified MI9 archives. Decades had passed since the world learned the truth about coded correspondence from prisoner camps. Yet Pryor remained unknown to most, his name absent from the grand histories of D-Day. The war he had helped to steer was remembered through generals, admirals, and soldiers, not through the man who fought it with ink. Still, as he traced his handwriting, he recognized that victory had not been written solely in blood, but also in words, precisely measured, calmly delivered, and dangerously invisible. Outside, the post-war world thrived in uneasy peace, its nations rebuilding cities that once burned under the skies he had dreamed of escaping. Sonar, radar, and nuclear-age intelligence now defined modern warfare, yet the essence of Pryor's achievement endured. The principle that knowledge, when disguised with elegance, could shift empires. His coded letters, once dismissed as folly, had become teaching material in British intelligence courses, their brilliance acknowledged quietly in training rooms marked restricted. Former MI9 analysts, now retired, described him as the prisoner who deceived deception itself. Pryor, however, sought no acclaim. He considered his wartime service a duty fulfilled within the margins of history's pages. When he died a few years later, the obituary mentioned merely his naval commission and academic career, omitting entirely the invisible campaign that had saved thousands. Yet within government archives, beneath the seal of wartime intelligence, his words remained preserved, proof that sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest consequence. Each coded phrase, once penned beneath the gaze of German censors, had become part of humanity's collective defense against oppression. The invasion that liberated Europe might have faltered without those fragile pages smuggled through hope and fear alike. Today, historians remember John Pryor as the man who turned captivity into communication and silence into strategy. His legacy endures not upon monuments, but within the discipline of every intelligence officer taught to find meaning within madness. The pen he once wielded in darkness wrote not just messages, it wrote survival. Beneath Colditz stone and history's weight, his words still whisper, reminding the world that even in chains, truth can travel farther than any army.